I don't attribute it to the cult for why I left the Catholic Church. It's, we're attending the Catholic Church, and every week it was a battle. Of course, the initial reaction is, well, stay here to save the people. But, it's people are under that. So, you can pray for people that are under structures or whatever, but it's God that has to bring them out. So, saying all that, do I have anything against Catholics? No. And anyone else in the world, even if a person's a Muslim, no. God is calling out to everyone, to the hearts of individuals. He is reaching in and pulling people out and saving them. In this last cult, I started going off the path when I started esteeming the leader too much. And, it began to where he would justify things. I went from being in the Word so much into another thing that, the Word was used so loosely. I mean, I can remember the leader would be like, oh, you know where that scripture is, and then I would look it up and it wouldn't quite match what he was meaning. So, things like that, where things would always be stretched and everything. Because one of the things that the cult was all about was about nosing around and stuff that the enemy was doing. I can remember the cult leader actually had all of us watch some of the series called Charmed, saying that we need to know what witchcraft, what they're about and what they're doing. Just complete garbage, because is that what the scripture says we are to do? No. Who cares? Every time, after that, anyhow, anything I needed to know regarding the enemy's camp or whatever, the Lord would share with me, and I wouldn't even have to go on that side of the fence. I know I've given words to witches and whatever, and, it's a word in season, it's straight from God, and I don't have any part in it. It's straight from the Lord. So there is never a reason why we need to go and, as I call it, dip your toe in a cesspool. This witchcraft we're exposing or whatever we're doing, it's so important that this has to get out. It's some new big revelation. It's, and that's the whole thing with cults is, it's like some big secret, and you're the front runner, you're the first one, you're on the edge, you're on the tip of the cresting wave and all this kind of stuff. So that is, if you're in the Lord, you're not going to miss out on anything ever, okay? Like I said, I produce shows, and one of them was exposing a kind of witchcraft, and we needed an interview of a person that used to be in that kind of witchcraft. What I wanted for the program was someone that was, like the dark screen so you can't see their face, to actually testify on it. And I didn't spend the time to do it. Instead, I just went ahead and produced it myself. I set it up so that I was actually saying it as if I was this person that used to be involved in this witchcraft. And, that is a lie. It doesn't matter that it's a good thing. It doesn't matter that people have actually testified or whatever. But I was, I didn't put it's a dramatization on the video. I did it as if I was that actual person. And that is wrong. And over, it's just that kind of stuff. The little white lies, you got to stretch it a little further, a little further, a little further. Till finally, the bad fruit was just rampant. And I could not stand myself. I hated giving people guilt trips for not serving. The cult leader uh, he had his privacy invaded, and he had stuff that was very wrong done to him or whatever. But from that point on, a spirit jumped on him big time, and it affected him. And that spirit is in the territory that he was living in. That whole privacy invasion, peeping Tom, snooping, whatever you want to call it, the root of it is a spirit of fear. And so if he would begin to examine the fruits instead of justifying them, that's what the enemy likes to get us to do, is to justify our fears or whatever. Oh, I'm just being on the safe side. Oh, I can't trust this person, so I'm going to spy on them. That is not the Spirit of God. That is not trusting. That is not hoping. That is not loving. That is not doing that in all things. So that's one reason why I could leave this cult and then grow so much from the spiritual house cleaning series, because I could see where he was, and he just needed to go a step further into daily examination, because sometimes spirits sneak in and you justify them and they just become a part of you, and then if you're not examining all the time, you fall off the turnip truck. So I remember when I first started the cult, they had a message board, and I had been asking our local leader about someone, because the Lord was clearly showing me that in that circle there was a false prophet operating. And so I thought on the message board, well, why don't I just be really vague, not leave my email address or my name or anything, and ask a question? And the answer I got back was kind of like hinting at, I know who you are. And no, it's blah, 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 blah. And, it's just kind of that whole thing of I felt like, ooh, wow, really is a prophet. But now I realize that if you know anything about, there's programs out there called Stat Counter, where you can find out the IP address of any person. And he was really technical savvy, and so of course he knows. You cannot post something and be completely anonymous or whatever. He knew who everybody in the ministry was, because he knew their IP addresses. He knew what city they're in and everything, just by all this technical stuff that you can put into programs. And so there's one thing where I was really, really gullible. I really thought, ooh, he's a prophet. But his information, I was just newbie to technology than he was, and I really got taken advantage of there, because I really couldn't be private. Another thing that happened, obviously, I talked about he had a spirit of privacy invasion and that kind of thing. So, of course, he's going to manifest that spirit. For a while, he'd be talking with my husband about stuff, and he had gotten my husband to talk about his grandma. So my husband would always call her Ma something, Ma, her last name. Well, wouldn't you know, in our email program, our whole email service thing, he already knew what her screen name was. But if you go in through, it was an Apple account, if you go into Apple and you try and retrieve the password or whatever, and if you forget it, you can answer by a question. And the question my husband had picked is, what is your mother's maiden name? Oh, feeling like a sucker. Well, anyhow, yeah. So by asking questions about my husband's grandma, he got the last name. So, of course, he gets into our email account. And it's interesting because if you do drafts, if you do a draft, it'll save the draft on the server. And so he could have our email address loaded in on his Mac and his own account, but have it as like a pop account or whatever, or an IMAP account. And anytime I would start writing an email up and it would save as a draft automatically, it would show up on his computer. So I remember one day I was writing a letter to another partner, but I hadn't sent it yet. I was just doing the draft for it. And the leader calls me up and is basically talking about the contents in my letter that I haven't sent out yet. When that happened, I was like, whoa. I started thinking about, but then, this is what you do in a cult. You put the leader on a pedestal and you say, no, nothing can do them wrong. I'm not going to speak evil of them, whatever. But I knew right then and there. And I went in and I changed the password for the email account, but I never changed the what's your mother's maiden name answer. So it didn't matter how many times I changed it. He always knew the grandmother's name and could get in. But if that tells you how bad it is, how many times did I do that? How many times did he continue to come in? Continue to sin against a brother and sister in the Lord. So, I can share this, and I'm, it's awful. Yeah. It's wrong. Yeah. Wounding. Yeah. But can I see the source of it? It's a spiritual problem, So I can forgive him, Father, for he knows not what he does. The ministry was about raising up prophets. And you need to have prophets in key media cities because then you will be able to influence, spiritually the whole realm around you. And so the important thing is to have prophets in key cities. Well, there would be like a prophet that wasn't him, but linked into the ministry that suddenly was having some financial problems. The person needs some help. Oh, we got to keep this person in the, got to keep their head above water or whatever. Well, then no, it's like all of a sudden the story would change and it's like, well, no, if you give them money, you're just feeding the poverty spirit that's on them. He already had a place in one place. He had a place in another place. Moving to another place. Of course, all the members are paying for it. Well, my husband, he happened to have business in that city. And, wouldn't it be nice, because it's an expensive city, if my husband and his business partner could stay at that condo. I mean, after all, we're paying for it. Well, then all of a sudden, the leader's like, oh, no, I've got too much equipment here, and, just, so it's this whole thing. I mean, you begin to realize that, he's storing up this stuff for himself. All this stuff, comes out when it comes down to it. Everybody's money was going to support him and his lifestyle, and it, can you believe we were in this cult? Well, guess what? There's other people in this cult. It's still going on. One of the last times I talked to him, he was doing the same old thing of just ripping and shredding other partners. It's fine, take their money or whatever, but then just rip them to shreds. And I just could not, that and curse, 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 curse. And I'm like, you know what? That is just wrong fruit. I just cannot do this anymore. And so, of course, anytime you leave anything, you're going to get backlash. Another thing, when you leave a cult, it's kind of like the Shawshank Redemption. Here he'd been doing all this stuff and everything, but then when it's like, oh, hey, he's going to get vindicated or whatever, well, then he's shut up and locked up so hard that there's never going to be a way out. When I left, I had mentored so many people and trained so many people, been so close with so many people for so many years, and not one of them came to me afterwards and said, hey, what's going on? Actually, one did, but it wasn't somebody in the inner circle. It was somebody else, and so it's kind of like that person helped me, and then another person that was in the ministry in the past that kind of got dissed. But, of course, everything about them was jaded from the leader. And I mean, that's that kind of power when you have a system set up to where there's a leader and no eldership. There's no other people you can go onto. It's like you deal with a cult leader only, and then there's nobody, you're in other cities and whatever. It's like nobody's allowed to really challenge the leader and his fruit. It's not like he gets any special counsel. He kind of shielded himself in there. So all of the people, except for like that one that was already, kind of out the door, I got to confide with them. But everybody else, nobody even said a word. So I know that my compromised email account, who knows what was said, who knows what was done, but all in all, there's nothing to do but walk away. And it was hard, but the Lord sent me people. He always sends people to help through everything. And not only am I sent people, but he pushes me on this path of even greater cleansing. And so I've been really happy. You're supposed to rejoice in the past. And let me tell you, in this treasure box of the things that I've went through in life, I'm so happy to share it with all of you, because the things that I've learned about, spiritually, of how the enemy can get access just by our thought life, by being negative, the woundings that we have, who we've hung around with, the soul ties created. I had this treasure stored up and waiting for me as I got out as well, in the whole spiritual house cleaning series that was awaiting me. And I could take all of those things that the Lord showed me throughout this whole cult process. I got to see so much, because let me tell you, when you're around anointed people, miracles happen, spiritual experiences, just, all this stuff happens, and you can see they're God working and moving, and yet the enemy is so entrenched in it at the same time. You just begin to say, why? And so through the house cleaning series, that's how the Lord showed me why. Realize this, that I am part of a cycle, that I have been wronged and wounded as well. But I've broken that cycle, and I can agree with Romans 11:28 and 29, that the Lord loves his people, that they are beloved, and he wants them back desperately. Now, my last video in this series is going to be dealing with the spirit of bondage that was behind everything I dealt with, because the moment it was broken, I was free. And I want that for you too. So stay tuned.